This is a simple chart of this year's Shawwal sighting information when the moon was initially supposed to be sighted on the Thursday, the 16th of July. Now, this is what, if you go onto a website like moonsighting.com or moonsighting.org.uk, this is the type of chart that you will see. It tells you, and any person can verify and check where there's a likelihood of sighting, if any, and more or less when we get the information of authentic sightings, it coincides with this. We haven't seen anything contradicting it. If we look at this now, this is Asia, India, Saudi Arabia over here. This is the African subcontinent, and there the Americas. Now, this is what you see here. The visible with optical aid only is the red area. And this is also in an area where it's very unlikely to be sighted. The moon was about 14 to 14 and a half hours, and according to the information, it's very rare to sight the moon, and thus we did not get positive sighting information from there. If we go on, these areas, the gray area is optical aid to find the moon, visible if perfect conditions. Now, there was some information which, if you look on moonsighting.com, of sightings around Chile and one established sighting from California. Again, the experts there did not feel it's sufficient. So within America, the California sighting was not accepted by a lot of people. The Chile sighting, Panama, for example, takes information from Chile, but they were not satisfied with that sighting, so they again did their Eid on Saturday. So based on this, more or less, we've been looking and observing this. The information that is given here coincides with the reality on the earth. Now, this is where Saudi Arabia is in green. Chile, Argentina, Colombia, those. If the moon also, now I mentioned that the moon has phases. The moon, when it's born, it will be sighted in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere. 6 months, depending on its orbit, the moon will be in the southern hemisphere. So people in the southern hemisphere, depending on where it's born. Sometimes it's born over Australia, and if the curve is such, most of the earth on the following day will be able to sight the moon. Similarly, if it's born later on, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Africa will start sighting it. And depending on how far down south the moon's curves are, the Asian continent and Europe or Southern Europe will start observing it on the first day. The following day, most of the world should be able to sight the moon, so that it will be much older. Now, the moon is born and travels from east to west. The moon's orbit is from east to west. So there is a law of Islamic fiqh that if the moon is sighted in the east, the countries to the west will more or less sight it, and they can take that information from them. Now, if the moon is sighted in India, it's growing older by age as it's traveling. So the subsequent countries after India should be able to sight the moon more or less. Sometimes it might be possible that India sighted it, but the country after, for instance, Pakistan, was cloudy, so they didn't sight it, but the countries following will sight it. Now, the problem that creates doubt and why we are not taking the Saudi information is that if you look at the information for years back, you will see that Saudi makes a declaration, and on that particular day, none of the countries after Saudi tend to see the moon. And that is the reality even this year. If you look at the Eid declaration, Saudi declared that the moon has been sighted, and we see countries, the whole of Africa, Europe, there is no practical sighting in the Americas also. So if there's no sighting taking place, then that sighting that we have got from Saudi is doubtful for us. This is the following day, Friday. Now, the green area is where it's visible unless due to clouds or obstruction, the moon was not seen, more or less, and the moon is getting older. It's more than 30 hours old. So all these countries should be able to see it. Now, what we need to understand, we as England are still in the red here. Because of our geographical location, we will not sometimes sight the moon until the 3rd or 4th day. And that is why we have to look for information from another country. And one of the questions posed is, why don't we just practice on Sunnah and do 30 days when you don't sight the moon? If we were to do that, by the end of the year, we might be 6-7 days behind the rest of the world in moon sighting, because the moon is not seen for 2-3 days. We'll end up doing 30 days nearly every month. Again, this is just a diagram of the world to show you the locations of the countries. Now, Australia is here, there's Indonesia, Malaysia. A lot of times when the moon is in the southern hemisphere, like we saw, these countries will be first to see the moon, because obviously the Maghrib time takes place there first. Now, why do we not, one of the questions, take information from countries after England, as far as the country to the west of England, in other words? Why do we not, for instance, Chile might have sighted the moon this time. Would we not be practical in taking that information? As long as we get it early morning, we can still practice on it. It's not practical. If we were to read Taraweeh, if there's a country which is giving us a declaration 13 to 14 hours after our Maghrib, how are we supposed to practically follow it? So it's not practical, even though if on the concept of Ittihadul Matali', where the horizon of every area is considered one, and we are sharing information from other countries, we cannot practice on something which is after our Maghrib time, especially when we have restricted time in these summer days. We need to pray Maghrib pray our Isha Taraweeh within a certain amount of time, otherwise we lose that time. This is a rough idea of the coming month of Dhul Hijjah, where we will be again looking for the moon so that we can practice our Qurbani and Eid al-Adha. Now again, if we look at the first night, Sunday, September the 13th, nowhere in the world is it possible to see the moon. If you look at this, this is where the moon is being visible. It might be born before that, but it's becoming visible, and even there, it's visible with optical aid only, and very rare to be sighted even in South America. So it's not practical to sight the moon on this particular day. Whereas if you look at the day after, most of Africa will certainly sight it. Parts of Australia will be able to see it also. This area, if there is a good view, they've got optical aid, should be able to also sight it. So there is a very big likelihood that on this particular night of the September the 14th, the moon should be sighted. Now, why don't we just take astronomical information? Why don't we just take this and decide our date on that? The reason being is, the Sunnah concept is that the moon has to be sighted for the moon to be declared. This can be used, and this is the defining aspect. A lot of people do allege that we follow astronomical information and we don't follow the Sunnah. Until we do not get established information of a sighting from an agreed authority, we will not declare the month, even though astronomical data will say otherwise. So astronomical data is only to verify sighting. A lot of senior ulama, including Mufti Taqi Saab and a lot of Mufti Nizamuddin Saab, Mufti Rashid Ahmad Saab Ludhianwi Rahmatullah alayhi, have said that we can use astronomical data to negate a sighting. So verifying a sighting, whether it was proper or not, astronomical data. And Mufti Taqi Saab goes as far as saying that if the moon is not of a certain age and according to astronomical data, it cannot be sighted, then that testimony is muttaham, it is doubtful, and it will be refuted unless there is a mass sighting. Unless there is a mass sighting, if there is a mass sighting that we cannot say that these people have agreed to lie for this, then in that particular instance, we will overrule astronomical data and follow the mass sighting. Otherwise, a few sightings will not establish the month if it contradicts astronomical information.